Okay, well, we'll give Jimmy a minute to bring up our next panelists. Looks like, oh, look at that, how fast he is. Lightning speed here, Jimmy. It's great. I think we're probably ready to go. So I now have the pleasure of introducing our moderator for our big tech panel, Wei Gao. Wei brings over 20 years of operating leadership across product and technology to her role as venture partner at Madrona. Most recently, she was the COO at Hopin, the leading shared experiences platform that enables immersive connection from anywhere. Prior to Hopin, Wei spent nearly 16 years at Amazon, where she was VP of Amazon's grocery and served as technical advisor to Jeff Bezos. In 2019, she received the Asian American Corporate Leadership Award from the Chinese Institute of Engineers and was recognized as one of the top 50 most powerful women in tech by the National Diversity Council. I'm thrilled to work with and welcome Wei Gao to Launchable.
Thanks, Mike, for the introduction. What a fantastic conversation there between you and Amit. The theme of this year's Launchable event is GenAI Apps. And Amit just talked about what's happening at Google and answered a number of questions. I'm excited for this next 30 minutes, joined by three fantastic panelists to continue the conversation about how generative AI is already making an impact at large enterprise companies, how GenAI is already enhancing a number of products and services and customer experiences. And some of you probably have heard many of the updates over the past months and over a year, but most recently, Amazon released a new set of GenAI capabilities to help their sellers easily create product descriptions, titles, and listing details. Amazon also released the GenAI capabilities to summarize customer reviews, making it easier for customers to really get the highlights without looking through thousands of the product reviews. Bard is now connected to Google Search and many of the Google apps and services. And Microsoft is racing to integrate OpenAI into all of their enterprise and consumer products. So with that as a context, our panel today, you're going to hear from our panelists about what's happening in their world, and then give you some ideas around, what kind of problem should you focusing on solving? How should you think about differentiating your products and innovations? And then, as Amit touched briefly, how should you think about partnering with larger companies? We have a lot to discuss, but before we get started, I will have my panelists introduce themselves. I know how uncomfortable I feel when I got introduced by someone else. So I'll have you all introduce maybe yourself individually. So why don't we start with Farah?
Hi, everyone. I'm Farah Ali. I am VP of a group called Technology Growth at Electronic Arts, a gaming company. And really excited to be here and talk about how we use AI, generative AI across interactive experiences. Particularly one part of my group does applied research across 6 vectors, one of which is generative arts. And we definitely use a lot of AI across all of these other vectors on feature graphics, neural animation, personalized experiences. So looking forward to chat about it.
Thank you. Ambrish? We can't hear you. Why don't we switch to Nancy first while you look at the setup? Nancy?
Yeah, happy to go ahead. Hey, Wei. Yeah, so like Wei, I am also an Amazon alum. I spent the last 5 years at AWS as a GM for data protection and our data security businesses. Have spent a decade thinking about how to protect data for some of the largest enterprises and government agencies out there. So for any of the founders out there who are considering those problems or thinking about starting companies in those spaces, you know where to find me. And similar to Wei, I have now made the leap onto the dark side while I brainstorm my next idea. So I'm a venture partner for Felicis Ventures.
Hi there.
Back to Ambrish.
Am I audible now?
Yep.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Ambrish, and I have been also leading product and technology at large and small companies over the last 20 years. AI has been a common thread across many of these experiences, starting from early days of Microsoft search and advertising, then building recommendation systems at Great Karma, and then most recently leading Facebook app monetization at Meta. Also, I've been, over the last few years involved in advising and investing in some of the early stage companies, mostly so in the fintech and AI space. Very excited for this conversation today.
Thank you all. Well, let's dive right in, and I'll start with a warm-up question. I'd like to hear from you this, the specific, like I'd like to hear from each of you, what is the overall stance of your organization on incorporating generative AI into your existing products? For example, how are you organized to do that? What is the level of urgency? How do you decide what to work on? Why don't we start with Farah?
Yeah, sure. So, as I was saying, we already have been using in gaming AI for things like, your non-playing characters or for doing dynamic difficulty in games and things like that. So it's, AI is not a new concept, but I think with generative AI, there's a lot of excitement. There is definitely, I think every company feels the tailwind, right, from AI in information work and solving sort of industry-specific problems. But I think organizationally, we believe that in gaming and interactive experiences, this space is going to reap a significant benefit because of the heavy manual lift nature of content creation work, and how well that maps into advances in generative AI. So I think the three things that get us really excited is that we have IP that's unique to us. We have talent, especially creative talent, that can take a lot of these generated things and create very novel experiences and ideas out of them. And then we have data from like 20-30 years of building all kinds of AAA games, casual games, mobile games, so kind of across the board. So it's definitely kind of a big piece of conversation. And I think the way that we think about it is that it is sort of AI assisted, or it's human assisted sort of work. So again, the creative is at the center of the loop, because without that, you can churn out something that can basically be like every other competitor could produce if you're just sort of producing what any large language model can produce. So it's really about how do we take the uniqueness of our talent and our IP and our data to use AI in a very novel way. So we're trying to go from where we have different teams that are masters in AI to sort of becoming a more AI native company where everybody speaks the language and it's sort of a core competency.
I love that. I love the collective approach, but with creator at the core. Nancy?
Sure. And similar to what Farah was mentioning, as I'm sure you all know with AWS, the SageMaker platform, different, recognition or texture or Kendra, right? Amazon is also not new to AI. However, myself working more in the core storage and also data storage spaces, if you think about ways that generative AI can, for example, speed your cyber recovery, right? Being able to actually serve as a co-pilot in different security operations center functions like incident response management. There's so much potential. And in fact, actually, not just within the AWS context, but that's actually an area where I've seen a ton of startup activities around, for example, not just how do you actually serve as a functional co-pilot, but actually how do you secure the data that's going into LLMs and hence the output of those LLMs.
Ambrish?
Yeah, similar to Farah and Nancy, I would say opportunities are everywhere. And there's probably any single product that we look across Meta, you can find opportunities how generative AI will be applicable to that. In the case of Meta, I would say monetization, where especially I focused on. I would say there are two things that we need to be extremely diligent about. How do we protect, grow consumer engagement, and how do we continue to grow the monetization through ads capability? And if you look at it, at the center of each of these is content. And when we apply the framework of how can we be assisting or augmenting or even automating many of the content creation capabilities, generative AI plays a very important role. So that's one element of it. Second scenario I can also talk about is that pretty much every company, small or large, business or consumer, they all have need for customer support or customer conversations. What are the ways we can be enabling those? Even in the past days when old instances of chatbot companies were shying away, now everyone is looking for help, how they can bring it to their workflows. They are either trying to figure out how they can build it internally, can they justify the cost to commercialize it, or should they be hiring some external help? This is another way, in many ways, with Meta supporting our businesses, we look through the business messaging and so on. But in general, most of the organizations can benefit from these fundamental ways where generative AI can be very helpful.
What I'm hearing, I feel like there's a core to how your teams are approaching this. There's a creators being at the core. Amazon often takes more of a customer-centric approach. And I think, Ambrish, you were talking about a lot of the sort of what is the business outcome you want to achieve, and then how can you find the best way of moving the needle there. And I think it's really important because GenAI or not, right? Working backwards from the problems that you're trying to solve, and then the solution, the technology is the ways, maybe accelerating the path or be able to elevate the level of solution you can deliver. And so from that high level picture, maybe moving to some specific examples, if you have any, one or two specific use cases you would like to share where, the application of the generative AI really has driven a step level change in the product experience or productivity or our business outcome. I will start with you, maybe Ambrish.
Sure. So Meta advertising is all about performance, and some of the recent product announcements that we have seen in the form of Meta's AI Sandbox or Meta's Advantage Plus product suite, they're all super fascinating. In the sense, Sandbox provides advertisers ability for creative generation or text variation or creative generation or even the image outcropping. But what I find even more exciting is how Meta's Advantage Plus product suite has been helpful. So some of the things that I find really interesting is Advantage Plus Creative, which essentially can adjust the ad creatives in a way that it personalizes what view is delivered to which user. That really resonates with them and they will respond to it. Similarly, Advantage Plus campaigns will automatically create over 150 different variations of creatives and will experiment with them, will test with them to make sure that advertisers are getting the best return on their ad spend. So these are really a step function change in how advertisers can expect to reach their target audience. And especially I find that these will be true enablers for the smaller businesses or SMB advertisers who earlier did not have the resources or the skill set to manage this level of experimentation or this level of optimization. But now with the generative AI capabilities, they all can have this access. So that I would say is one of the changes that I've been quite impressed with.
That's great. Nancy?
Yeah, so thanks, Ambrish, for sharing an example on the advertising side. So maybe I'll contrast with actually the recent investment that I made. We talked about incident response, right? So for those of you who may not be familiar with the sector, incident response is frankly a team that gets pummeled. Whenever data breaches happen, whenever intrusions detected within an enterprise, they're the team that's frankly paged or are on call. And so these folks often get thousands, if not more, right, different alerts from all of their different cloud resources, SaaS applications, you name it, right? And so this idea that I actually built conviction around was being able to actually target specifically product security. So with the whole shift left of baking security into whatever you build, right, what if you could actually connect the alerts that you get from for example, various, detection tooling and actually connect that to contextual rich runbooks, right? So that's the idea. And of course, enabled with LLM that can self-learn based on every incident that comes in and actually connecting that to a contextual specific runbook that you can then automate with a human in the loop. So that's the general idea. Obviously, this team is very, very early, but just thinking about, again, the ability and the potential of generative AI to augment, right, human operators, and eventually to build sufficient awareness and contextual learnings so that when something comes in, or even before something comes in, you can actually bake proactive feedback loops to make sure that those intrusions or those vulnerabilities never happen in the first place.
Fascinating. Amit mentioned earlier that how important data security is in this new, even more, crucial in this new world. I love this example of using GenAI to be more nimble and then react faster and potentially automate better the whole process. Farah, would you like to add a couple examples?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the, on the developer efficiency side, using things like co-pilots for coding or getting access to information much more quickly when you have your own data trained on, GPT. I mean, those things are adding obviously a lot of value. I think when I think about game specific or things that we're doing that you show up in a game and creation, one recent example is we built this tech called voice to face. So what that does is takes recorded speech and then generates facial animations and lip sync animations from it very realistically. And so now you can generate, facial animations and lip sync in real time, as opposed to having a voice actor, having the time that it takes, the weeks or the months to actually go and iterate. And so the turnaround time for doing that stuff is so much faster. So your productivity goes kind of through the roof. The turnaround is great. And just being able to do this real time means that, you have animators have more fine-grained control of the end result, of the output, of the speaking style. And probably saved us like years of animation effort, depending on the complexity of the end product. And you can think of this as, we do a lot of sports games. So you can imagine, announcer voices. If you think of all of our role-playing RPG games, you can think of characters having conversations or going into battle. You can think of, games where, like Sims, for example, which has its own made-up language, that still kind of applies. So you can see how we can do this one time and then have the benefit kind of reaped across multiple games in multiple different ways. And I think that the biggest kind of, again, the performance gain, the turnaround time was, I think, the biggest benefit, because that lets you really focus on the quality of the output. Similarly, things like you can imagine with games, you have, lots of worlds, and we created a lot of these procedurally as well. And now, like, for example, I think about stadiums, if we can just kind of aligning from aerial imagery on posts and components in the ground, you can actually generate entire stadiums from scratch. And again, this type of creation speeds things up from months to weeks. So if you were launching a particular game with, let's say, 20 stadiums, now you can launch with 150. And so that's a really big transformational increase for us. So I think it's been, it's allowed us to 10x a lot in terms of the quality of the content that we generate, as well as the sheer amount of content that we can produce.
Wow, that is amazing. As an ex-gamer, that sounds exciting. But now as a mom of 2 teenage boys, I have mixed feelings about that. But I'm sure we're going to see a change of new games and new things coming. That's great. Well, with every new technology innovation in history, there comes new challenges, that brings new challenges. So I would like to maybe hear like what significant challenges you have encountered during this early stage of GenAI and large language model adoption process, and how did you overcome them? This time, Nancy, we're going to start with you.
Sure. So I'm sure one thing that's top of mind for those of us who still work in large enterprises is really the confidentiality of data, right? I'm sure a lot of us saw articles where developers were actually feeding source code into ChatGPT and then realizing, oh, wait, that's not a private instance, right? So obviously don't do that. But I think more holistically, longer term, right, there's different questions around hallucinations, right, catastrophic forgetting, for example, especially if you're training a model to answer hardcore questions or maybe be a significant factor in decision making, right? So those are things that, frankly, I think about, especially as it comes to the data privacy use cases as well as the data security use cases.
And do you have you had experiences so far in how to address those, how to try to overcome those?
So this is an area I would say is rich with a lot of startups right now in terms of, there's different approaches such as inserting a proxy in front of the API calls. I mean, that's just one example, but certainly I think the number or the amount of activity of founders trying to tackle this problem, I do think will up-level ourselves in terms of our maturity in thinking about how data goes into an LLM, how we can make sure that we avoid bias, for example, when generating responses from LLMs. And overall in terms of how developers work with LLMs.
Thank you. Farah?
I think in general, like the biggest challenge, being in a big company versus a startup is just the sheer size and scale and, different levels of technical awareness that people are at, right? So, kind of what Nancy was saying is just educating people, and what to do and what not to do. So here you have all these tools that can make people more efficient and can help them productivity-wise. But on the other hand, there's a lot of, the risk framework is ever evolving. And I think that was the number one challenge is, the tech was ahead of the legal and risk framework and kind of continues to stay ahead. And every day there's like a new model that's out, and then you have to go and legal has to look at, okay, what are the approved use cases? Which approved use cases can we allow this for which IP, non-IP? So, we deal with that, and it's, it's something that's very hard to stay on top of. I think the second thing is just how quickly things are evolving. I think this is one of those times that this is one of those rare times where we just kind of see this, flood of information, almost daily changes that are happening. And it's really impossible for any one person to keep on top of it. And so, a couple of things we've done is we've created a central program around AI/ML across the company. We've kind of come up with like 3 or 4 work streams that we think are the most critical, one around knowledge sharing, one around legal and risk framework, one around ongoing like kind of big projects and keeping track of them and giving everybody an update. And then just kind of thinking about how do we push this information out, building little playground sandboxes for the right cohorts to come in, test out things, and give feedback so we can quickly tune things. So for enterprise, our EA, Slack, GPT integration, for example, those type of things, or indemnity when it comes to using some of these kind of coding tools and things like that. So yeah, I think with big companies, there's this, you have to take everyone with you. And I think it's also about prioritization. So we really are prioritizing sort of their facing and then developer productivity use cases. But, I mean, there's data analyst use cases. There's, use cases for a finance team or PE, people experiences teams, legal teams. So we really have to work at it from here's our kind of year 1 plan and year 2 plan and year 3 plan. So it's pretty exciting though that like tech is moving so fast, but it is super hard to keep up with it.
Thank you. Ambrish?
Yeah, I mean, lots of great insights from Nancy and Farah already. I will add one more from the little bit outside of the organization perspective in terms of driving adoption for these things, which is AI good enough? So for example, in case of advertising, often we are working with large brands who will have either very capable internal creative team who will be generating these ads creatives or so, or they will be working with professional ad agencies whose full-time job has been to create these highly performant ad creatives. Now, bringing generative AI into this ecosystem also has a challenge that how do we win the trust? Is AI good enough? So the way most of the times you have seen success in providing capabilities where advertisers can gain side-by-side experience as a test, as they iterate, and they gain confidence that now they are ready to make a transition. So those have been some of the ways, and I can imagine that this will be applied to many such scenarios where we are hallucination and is AI good enough? What is our tolerance for error in different scenarios? Those kind of issues will need to be resolved and addressed.
That's very true. Well, switching gear to data, in Mike's kickoff, he mentioned how important data is to generate GenAI apps. And Amit talked a little bit also about the importance of data. And Nancy, you just touched on this briefly as well. So drilling in there, obviously data is the key. I love to hear, how crucial in your build environment, in your product services, how crucial were the data quality and availability in the success of your AI initiatives, and how did you manage data related challenges? Why don't we start with you, Farah?
I think when it comes to like data, player behavior data or consumer insights or metrics, I think, those, relatively stay the same. I think where the bigger challenges is, do we have enough training data? Do we have the right, are we tagging them accurately? And we have our 2D assets, but then what about our 3D assets and things like textures and trees? And, the more of that data that we have well tagged and classified, the more that we can actually do with it. And so there is definitely has been an effort ongoing for many years to actually ingest and classify and tag that data. And so it becomes even more important. And so again, we take a use case approach of like, what type of data do we need to train, like these speech models that I talked about for voice to face? What kind of data do we need to do, like character generation, heads, eyes, hair, facial simulation. So there's a lot of these different types of use cases. And it's again about prioritization and, the cost benefit of like storage and all of that. But yeah, I mean, for us, the good thing is with large language models, you can do a lot with less data. So that's the good thing, that we can actually tune really high quality with less data. But being able to have good quality data tagged is of prime importance for any sort of, I think, AI problem.
Ambrish?
Yeah, I would say it's very crucial. I mean, data is the key, but let's unpack, kind of similar to what Farah mentioned. It is, when we look at data essentially consists of what is the content, as well as how, what is the annotation or labels, and how it has been generated for those use cases. So that is an extremely important area that we need to pay attention to. Second important element also comes is, what is the permissioning of this data? So especially in where we have to be kind of following the compliance and regulatory concerns, do we have enough user consent to use data for certain scenarios? So those also become very important. So those will be a couple of points that I would out from the data side.
Thank you. Nancy, is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just add a quick line, given that Farah and Ambrish covered it quite well. Is if you're, let's say, a founder and you're trying to build models for proprietary domain-specific use cases, the availability and also the quality of your data is pretty crucial, because these models are voracious depending on what stage you choose to train them. So let's talk about, like, if you're trying to train a GPT-like model, a small set of high signal data can suffice. But if you can't afford situations like I talked about before, like catastrophic forgetting, then you will need a much larger volume data to train. And so this is an area where, going back to Amit's fireside chat, talking about partnering with a larger enterprise like GCP or Amazon or Azure, this is where their access to data can become really handy. So I'll give an example in the startup world as well. So a well-known WAF or web application firewall company recently tuned and built their own LLM because they were sitting on 10 plus years of intrusion data, right? So that's an example of where having large volumes of data can help you actually win out in a model race.
I like that you mentioned about partnership, because that's where I'm going next. Can each of you share examples, since we have a lot of founders and builders here, and I'm sure they're looking for partnership out there. So what are some of the examples where you have partnered externally to solve an AI product feature or technology gap or need in kind of delivering a full solution for your customers? I will start with Ambrish this time.
Yeah, I mean, AI is a system, and essentially partnerships can happen at every different levels in the stack, if you think about it. So for example, like Meta has been making a Llama 2 available through all the cloud providers, through Azure, AWS, and GCP. So partnerships are crucial there to drive adoption across the whole developer community. Similarly, we also heard the announcement earlier this year about Shutterstock and Meta partnering on on the high quality image and tier annotations to essentially train the foundational models. So again, that every level in the stack, we can see partnerships can be valuable in terms of growing the value in the technology, driving the adoption across the ecosystem. So that's how we would look at.
Thank you. Nancy?
Yeah, so I'll give an example of actually, so before AWS, I worked at a company called Rubrik, that's also in the data protection space. And if you look at, for example, their announcement with Microsoft Azure OpenAI, as well as the Azure Sentinel, right? That's actually a very good description of the use cases that you can build as a startup company partnering with a larger enterprise. So again, some of those use cases fairly deep in security, like dynamically generating code when incidents are discovered, or being able to architect automatic workflows for incident responders, right, based on incoming alerts. So those are just examples of where you can take your core use case as a startup company, partner with a larger enterprise company to augment that, right? And I'm sure in the process, there will be lots of intelligence sharing or proprietary data sharing that you otherwise may not get access to.
Thank you. Farah?
I mean, in our case, we're basically leveraging the foundational models that exist, because there's a lot of this commodity models out there, and there's no need to go and kind of build them yourself, unless, the example Nancy gave of, if you have some really proprietary data and you can kind of go build something that's, outperforms other models, or those models don't exist. And then similarly on the infrastructure side, there's so much that's available. So, we just go to our kind of cloud service providers and leverage. So that's one way to partner with sort of industry and big tech. And then, look at the vertical or look at the space that you think that you want to build in, and then kind of think about how do you build something custom. Or again, for example, there's a startup that we're looking at and potentially piloting on, building quests. So in games, you can have anywhere, like the lifetime of a game, you can have thousands of quests that are generated. And so, and a large language model seems like a perfect sort of solution to actually go and generate some of these quests, you're in an arc in a game and now like, okay, go help me kind of win this battle, and then also let me rule over this kingdom, and how does that kind of happen? And so that would be something specific to us. We'd want to use our creatives, we'd want to use our data, but perhaps there's a startup out there that's specializing in this area, or like is really targeting kind of gaming quests, experiences, and narrative generation. And that would be a partnership that we would do, because while it's something that they can focus on, that one big broad area, we have to focus on the entire end-to-end building a game. And so if we can sort of partner with someone to accelerate this part of our pipeline, that's a great way to partner with kind of enterprises and startups. So kind of pick the specialization or the expertise where you either don't have the bandwidth or you don't have the expertise, and then that's a good way to partner with an external.
That's great. So many of the GenAI startup companies are still very early in their journey, right? They're early, they're small, they're just getting started. So still on partnership, when you look at partner with these startups, what are you looking for? What are the quick sort of top 3 things you're looking for, so that the founders and builders here can be better prepared? And then any challenges you have seen in these partnerships? I'll start, Nancy.
Yeah, so putting on my old AWS hat for a second, right? If you look at the AWS data protection page, you'll notice several starter partners with whom we've had partnerships, joint go-to-markets, or actually demos that showcase an integration that we had. And so a couple of things, right? Using the decision framework is one, do you extend my current capabilities, right? Because one, right, it doesn't make sense if we duplicate each other's value add to the end customer. Number 2, right, are your capabilities sufficiently deep enough? So that goes into the moat that we often talk about as product people, right? So is your capabilities, as a moat, right, differentiate you from other startups that, let's say, as an AWS, I could potentially partner with? And number 3, of course, this goes into dedication as well. As a young startup, I get it, right? You don't have all the resources in the world. You can't just throw 10 engineers into an integration with a larger company. But if this is sufficiently critical enough to your business model, into how you're thinking about go to market, right? There will be dedicated heads that you will have from a startup side into building out that integration, which is something, of course, you shouldn't take lightly as a startup founder. So those are things that I would think about. Now, I think taking a step back into the broader startup landscape, which is, as I'm looking at more startups these days, right, the LLM for X is not a defensible moat, right? Like, as we all talked about, right? It comes back to really, do you have access to proprietary data that your competitors do not? And also from a business model perspective, is your company built such that you have a positive data loop? As in, essentially, the more customers who use your product, the more data you're able to capture, and actually the better of a platform that you become.
Thank you. Super helpful. Farah?
Yeah, I mean, I guess jumping onto what Nancy said, looking at your proprietary data, and again, like I talked about our creatives, our talent, our IP, and our data, that's kind of our trifecta moat, right? And so where I would want to, partner, the narrative generation is a great example. Another example is, push button, go from script to scene. So like be able to go from a script to an entire cutscene with like props and characters and dialogue and lighting and things like that, right? There's a lot of these things that just don't exist. 3D, right? There's not a lot of models out there in the 3D space. We have a lot of 3D content. And so being able to partner with somebody in that space to generate realistic kind of 3D assets is another one. So yeah, I think when it comes to content creation for like entertainment, interactive experiences, there's kind of a whole set of things that's not existing yet. And so I think it's a great space for startups to kind of look at. And perhaps, maybe the addressable market they should look at isn't just gaming. They should look at it from interactive experiences in general, right? So what are all of the different kind of broadcast and other entertainment forms, and gaming is just one of them. And that could be a good way of thinking about it.
Yep. Ambrish, anything to add?
Yeah, I will just add it that having a focus area for especially for startups when resources are scarce and you can do only so much. So picking a niche area where you can really bring the value, which can be through proprietary data or proprietary domain understanding, which any of the large enterprises might not have the bandwidth or need to go that deep into. That's where startups can be really effective. So, but that will also require making sure that truly understand what is the end-to-end workflow where your solution is going to fit in. So having that deep understanding of overall end-to-end workflow in that, what is the role that your solution is playing, that will truly enable the success. Second thing I would add there is, which Amit also had highlighted in his conversation, that most of the other organizations are making sure that they stay compliant and they within any kind of regulatory boundaries. So when you're designing your solution, make sure that those considerations are taken into account first and foremost, because last thing any partnering organization would want to do is to increase their surface area for compliance and regulatory. So that will be another important thing that I would advise on.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of you for joining me for this panel, this session. It was a great conversation. I wish we have more time to discuss. And thank you for sharing what your teams are doing and offering advice to our audience. And to our audience, thank you for joining us. And I hope today's conversation gave you some good ideas about what problem space to focus on, how to differentiate your products and services, and then what kind of partnership you may want to form, even at an early stage. Again, virtual round of applause for my panelists. And don't forget, we have a week full of fun events and conversations ahead. And with that, I will pass it back to Mike.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Wei and Farah, Nancy, Ambrish. What a great conversation. So deep and insightful, really, really helpful to founders.